Good afternoon. Thank you for being there. And so we are going to begin the session titled. Vous n'entendez rien? Like, is it better like that? C'est mieux? I can put it inside, but it's more difficult for me. So, this, as you know, this session is called New Aspects of Maritime Cartography in Japan. And it's Vera Dorofeeva-Lichtmann who is going to begin this afternoon. And she presents a paper written by her and Ekaterina Simonova-Gudzenko, who unfortunately cannot be with us today for health reasons. So now, please, Vera, I'll let you the smoke.
Thanks. Comme ça? Yes. Thank you. So, our study is concerned with a very peculiar group of manuscript maps of Japan, drawn by a very peculiar person in quite peculiar conditions. But first of all, I would like to say that the study was conducted in the framework of the project on East Asian maps of East Asia at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. Its principal investigator was Dagmar Schäfer, the director of Department 3. And this project was was part of a large program on translation cultures, which is still ongoing. And I would like to express my deepest gratitude to Dagmar Schäfer for her support, and especially to the staff of the Max Planck Institute, who helped us to get the high-resolution copies of maps, publication permissions, as well as like all kinds of technical assistance, because some scans had to be stitched and so forth. And the author of this map is a Japanese sailor who drew these maps during the decade of his detention in Russia in the late 18th century. 8 maps are known to date, or I would say 7.5. All maps are large format colored manuscripts. They measure between 60 and 75 centimeters in height and 120, 1.5 meters in length, so quite large. I mean the map body, not the map sheets. And the maps resemble each other, but they are not identical. So the place names in these maps are originally given in Japanese. And since they were created for foreign usage, these maps are filled out by transcriptions. In 4 maps, transcriptions are given in Cyrillic, and translations comments are in Russian. In 1 map, transcriptions are given in Latin script, and translations comments in German. 2 maps are left in their original state, and there is 1 map which is recently discovered by my colleague, who will be the next speaker, Yuko Takigawa, is an unfinished draft. Well, she considers this to be an unfinished copy of the map by Daikokuya Kōdayū. So, and Daikokuya Kōdayū is widely known in Japan and in Russia. He's the hero of novels, films, even an opera. However, his dramatic history of his life overshadowed his maps, and studies of his maps are still fragmentary, and most of them, with one exception, as you can see, are published in Japanese. So 5 maps was thoroughly studied by a philologist and historian specialist in Slavic studies, Iwai Noriyuki. Then the maps attracted attention of some historians of cartography, especially also by such an outstanding person as Uno Kazutaka. Then a historian of cartography late in his life, Hasegawa Koji, discovered one more, the sixth map, but then he published two very short summaries, and I had the pleasure to take part in the conference on the history of cartography where he presented his poster. Then Yuko has just published an article on it. She will discuss it herself. And then there is also a peculiar study of the Hermitage curator who described the seventh map, also quite recently found in Hermitage Museum. And he published his study in Russian, and then it was translated into Japanese. Then our study with Ekaterina is forthcoming. In this volume, it will be an open access. And what we tried to do, we tried first of all to determine when and where exactly Daikokuya Kōdayū drew his maps, so the context. Then using quite simple formal criteria, and having analyzed the dates of the maps, we determined the affiliation. This was my primary interest, because before, in the Extant studies, the maps are mostly classified by their current whereabouts. And then we also discussed one of a maritime or nautical puzzle. And then we discussed quite a lot the acquisition history, but which I will not touch today. So let us first look at in which conditions the maps were drawn. So Daikokuya Kōdayū, then at this time in his early 30s, planned to sail from Ise Bay to Edo with a crew of 16. So together with him there were 17 persons. Then, but it was quite a simple journey, but which because of the storm, he was drifted. The ship drifted almost 8 months, and it finally wrecked on the shore of Amchitka, one of the islands of Aleutian Ridge, and where the crew stayed about 4 years. And then 7 persons of the crew died during this period. And then the dramatic part that one of the ship which came to pick them up also was wrecked. And here you can see a map from the collection to which belongs the 3 maps of Daikokuya Kōdayū. These are Russian maps, Russian nautical maps of showing the Kamchatka and the piece of Alaska. And it's with a note that Amchitka was quite dangerous place for sailing. And then finally 25 Russians and 9 surviving Japanese managed to leave Amchitka on a ship built of driftwood and otter skins. No one could believe that they could sail during 6 weeks and reached Kamchatka on this ship. And then in Kamchatka, the Japanese very fortunately met a French diplomat, Barthélemy de Lesseps, who arrived to Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky on February 11th, 1788, and who left a daybook where he described the Japanese, and he was very much impressed by Daikokuya Kōdayū. He was like outstanding person, very well educated, and who already spoke rather well Russian, according to Lesseps. So then in Kamchatka, 3 more Japanese sailors died, so there were only 5 left, but who kept almost till the end. And then after this, with the assistant of the commandant of Kamchatka, Timofey Khatkevich, they took the 5 Japanese to Okhotsk, which was one of the main ports, then to Yakutsk and Irkutsk, and there they met another quite outstanding person in the Russian history of science, Erik Laxman, who was from Swedish origins, and he was very passionately interested in Siberia. And it was Laxman who was the patron of the Japanese, and who was first asked Daikokuya Kōdayū to draw his map of Japan. So there is one map which is known from this period, and then from which is kept at the Göttingen State and University Library. And then Lichtmann had an idea that if the Russian crown were to return the Japanese to their homeland, this would be a considerable boost of relations between Russia and Japan. However, this required a permission from the highest level. And knowing very well the bureaucracy, he proposed to go to Petersburg themselves, and then, so they departed from Irkutsk on the 15th of January 1791 and arrived to Petersburg on the 19th February, thus having made it in about 5 weeks. And this was extremely fast because they could use official post service system of changing horses, and they, as it was said, they were on the way day and night, and they just spent one night in Moscow on the way. And just to compare with when one was exiled to Siberia, it could take like 6 months. So I was quite surprised that it was so fast, if you have good horses, a good system. So there in Petersburg, Daikokuya Kōdayū was, there was interest of two influential persons at the court, Alexander Bezborodko and Alexander Vorontsov. Also, I put their place of birth and place of death in red, because you can see just from this very formal approach that, for example, one person was born in kind of small place and ended his life in St. Petersburg, and Vorontsov, it was just the other way around. So the career was not the same. And then the permission was granted to return back to Japan, and again, especially Bezborodko urged to draw at least 6 more maps, and 5 of these maps were drawn during the month of March. So then they made their way back, this time a bit longer because they stopped in Moscow, in Nizhny Novgorod, and Tobolsk, then through Irkutsk, Okhotsk, and Hokkaido. And there, Daikokuya Kōdayū was accompanied by one of the sons of Lichtmann, Adam Lichtmann, who also left a daybook on which there is a publication in English and in Russian. So 3 persons could return to Japan. One unfortunately died just almost on just before the arrival, and 2 persons decided not to return back because they were baptized and got the Russian names, so they couldn't go back anymore. And also, thanks to Lichtmann's efforts, to Eric Lichtmann's efforts, Daikokuya Kōdayū returned to Japan with quite a lot of documents, including 10 maps, but none of those which were drawn by Daikokuya Kōdayū. And then, well, he left a comfortable life, married, had a son, but spent the rest of his life under surveillance and never, unless I'm mistaken, drew maps again. So, this summary shows that that the maps were drawn during very short time periods in 1798, and then during one month, almost, or maybe two at most, in 1791. So let us have a brief look at these maps. So they can be divided in 2 groups. 3 maps are known since long ago. They are found in Göttingen State and University Library. It's the so-called von Asch collection. And von Asch was working for the Russian crown, and he was a descendant of also the German Silesian family. And of course, as all the good families, they sent their sons first to go to study, to do serious studies, so it should be in Germany. And he studied in Göttingen and then couldn't forget Göttingen never in his life, and I can only share his impression. So during the rest of his life, he was a passionate collector, and he sent his collection systematically to Göttingen, and he acquired quite a part of Daikokuya Kōdayū's heritage. So this is the map which was actually sent, one of the last, but it's the first map which was drawn in Irkutsk. Actually, all the maps are signed and dated, and you can see the signature on the back. And just to have you the view, so you can see so it includes it just includes a piece of piece of Hokkaido, which is quite normal for maps like this. And there are two more maps which are quite interesting because one is copied from the other. Well, I still couldn't detect the way how it was copied technically. And then there is a second group, more maps which were started to be discovered in the end of the 20th, since the end of the 20th century. So two maps were discovered in 1998 in the Russian military and historical archives. And there is almost a detective story related to their discovery. I thank Yuko Takigawa for having called my attention to this story. Then one more in the National Archives of Estonia, in the archives of the Russian Admiral von Krusenstern. And one map was discovered shortly before 2012 in Hermitage, and then one more copy, unfinished copy, which will be presented by the next speaker. And so here are the maps from the state archives. You can see actually one of the maps, which is very dark one, is done because I inspected it personally. Is done on what is called how to say Beillevaire, on this transparent paper. So it was copied from something. One of these maps is also signed by Adam Laxman. And you can see also here that Daikokuya Kōdayū, he was apparently a bit already tired of drawing and redrawing the maps, so you can see that his signature is not too straight. So on the back of one of the maps, it is said that it was in possession of a jeweler and then antiquarian in St. Petersburg named Etta. You can see the stamps which are still have to be studied. And one of the maps, as I said, was found in the archives of Adam Johann von Krusenstern, or as one called him in Russian, Ivan Fedorovich von Krusenstern. And he was a nautical cartographer. He was a cartographer. And as you see, even on his portrait, you see a piece of a map which shows Sakhalin and a piece of Ezo Hokkaido. And so these are the two maps, one above from Estonian archives in Tartu, and the last map, which quite curious because it has German language inside, so they look quite similar. So on the back of one map that from Estonia, there is a short note in German, a short summary of Daikokuya Kōdayū's life. And the Hermitage copy is just there is just signature and date, and also already a bit careless. So Professor Iwai Noriyuki, he claimed that Daikokuya Kōdayū was inspired by maps from Popular Encyclopedia, and this idea was elaborated by Uno Kazutaka. So I used just one example of this Popular Encyclopedia. Also, I had to reorient it with the nose on top. And just what I wanted, I will not go into this origins because it's a very also interesting but separate issue. I wanted just to make a small comment on the dates, which is quite interesting. So the dates, I did not, je ne vois pas, 5 minutes? Ah? Oui. Donc, the interesting part of this, that the maps were still dated by 10 May era, which finished. So it means that in Russia at this time, and during 10 years when Daikokuya Kōdayū was there, it was not known that the eras changed in Japan. And also about the approximation of time needed for the map. He needed like 5-6 days per map, which I suppose he used a sort of some of a template, teamwork, and also Professor Iwai thought that he used some stamped. So, as I mentioned, just for example, to show you what one can get, that two very simple formal criteria for distinguishing type of maps, just the dimensions and the map configuration. And for the test area, we have the piece of Hokkaido, And just from this point of view, we get this filiation. We have the source map, which is of medium size and has some unique dimensions and also some unique configurations. And then we have model A, two first maps which are big, and model B, which are small. And my guess is that I haven't had the chance to measure that on all the maps, that the Japan itself is similar, it's just the place taken by the sea is a bit different. And then here's the last, maybe the most, the only relevant to the point of to the theme, this, as I say, maritime and nautical puzzle. That for some reason Daikokuya Kōdayū doesn't show the Kanmon Strait between Kyushu and Honshu Islands. So it is absolutely impossible that, as you see, that this the strait was known long ago. It's quite small, quite narrow, but it's absolutely impossible that Daikokuya Kōdayū didn't know about the strait. So my guess was that he didn't want to show it to the Russians, that there was a strait and that one could sail through it. My colleague Ekaterina has another hypothesis, which I hope she will elaborate. But just to conclude, so the maps of Japan by Daikokuya Kōdayū are rooted in the Japanese tradition, but do not copy really any of the known maps of Japan. They were drawn on the demand of Russian officials, but they failed to be recognized as documents of state importance. One should also mention that when just shortly after Daikokuya Kōdayū left for Japan in 1796, Catherine the Great died, and also the same year Eric Laxman died. So it became there was much less interest for Japan, for the politics, for maps at this moment. So it was most unfortunate. So most of the maps were acquired by private collectors, and only two of these maps, one through the hands of an antiquarian, finally landed in the Russian military and historical archives. And apart from the maps of the Ash collection, other maps were completely forgotten and were rediscovered only in the end of the 20th century. Thank you very much for your attention.
Vera, you have just spoken for 20 minutes, not 1 minute more. Thank you. Congratulations. Now, we have 10 minutes for questions, I think. So, are there any questions among the... So as you, so it's all right, because originally it was. I gave. I
think it's interesting to have the same maps, but from absolutely other point of perspective.
So now I give the floor to Professor Yuko Takigawa, who is going to, with adjunct instructor the international office in Kagawa University, and she's going to talk about the scientific value of the Daikokuya Kōdayū maps of Japan, copied by a British ambassador in Russia in the late 18th century.
So good afternoon, everyone. It is my great honor to join this panel, and I would like to congratulate the 50th anniversary of this research center of Japan. So this map was found in the Caird Library in the National Maritime Museum, Greenwich, London. The Greenwich map looks similar to the map which have just discussed by Dr. Dorofeeva-Lichtmann, but it has different characters and values. In this panel, I would like to describe the characteristics of the Greenwich copy briefly, and then discuss its contemporary scientific value, focusing on the following 3 points. First, British interest in Japan at the end of the 18th century through Daikokuya Kōdayū. Second, circulation of Japanese knowledge in Europe concerning charts and nautical knowledge. And third, British and Russian interest in the Far East. This is to show the 2 Russian envoys during the Edo period, which are backgrounds of my research. During his stay in Russia, Kōdayū is known to have made several copies of maps of Japan based on the printed map in a book he saved from the shipwreck. And just Vera has already shown to us, 7 copies in his hand-drawn map have been reported in the library and archives in Germany, Russia, and Estonia. So these are just 4 examples. The Greenwich copy, however, has different characteristics. As I am not a specialist of the cartographic studies, let me briefly introduce my previous research on early Japanese fish specimens for scientific descriptions of the species used by French scholars, which has led me to the investigation of Daikokuya Kōdayū's map of Japan. The early Japanese fish specimens were brought to Europe through 2 routes, that is, through the Dutch East India Company route and the Russian route. And the latter was the key to understanding the description of the French scholar Cuvier and Valenciennes. Cuvier and Valenciennes were able to use several Japanese fish specimens in Berlin, which had been brought back by Langsdorff, a German medical doctor who joined the Krusenstein expedition and the first Russian circumnavigation. Russians were not allowed to act on their own. Natural historians, Langsdorff and Tresius, secretly asked food suppliers to give them different kind of fresh fish, and instead of cooking them, they made stuffed specimens. I could also trace the existence and validity of the type specimens stored in the natural history museums in Berlin and Paris. Cuvier and Valenciennes also could use non-biological material, which is a woodblock printed book of haiku anthology from Japan, which had various kinds of Japanese fish images. Significantly, which descriptions by Cuvier and Valenciennes were earlier than those by Fauna Japonica by Temminck and Schlegel, based on the huge Japanese specimens in Leiden collected by Seevold, a famous German medical doctor for Dutch East India Company. This is why I started investigation on the first Russian expedition and Daikokuya Kōdayū from natural history and diplomatic point of views. In 2017, I found a series of interesting archives concerning Daikokuya Kōdayū in the National Archives in Kew, which suggests the existence of Daikokuya Kōdayū's map in the UK. A diplomatic report on the 7th of February 1795 shows that Charles Whitworth, a British ambassador in St. Petersburg, sent a precisely reproduced copy of the map of Japan to the British Foreign Secretary, Lord Grenville. The report states, "My lord, I have the honor to transmit your lordship a copy of a very curious chart of islands of Japan." Whitworth continued that Kōdayū looked very intelligent, and he engaged in forming a general chart of Japan in St. Petersburg under Laxman's protection. To Whitworth, the map appeared to be very exact, although there were neither soundings nor dangers marked in it, assuming that he did not choose to give the Russians more information. Whitworth also remarked that copy was made with the greatest accuracy from the original, and the Japanese writing, which was taken off, put on oil paper separately. Assuming that the map of Japan sent by Whitworth must have been stored somewhere in the UK, I continued my investigation to find the map in the museums and archives in the UK. It was in March 2020 that among the online catalogues of the Caird Library in Greenwich, that I found information of a manuscript, a chart of Japan or Nihon. The database was without an image, but the size was almost as same as those in the Göttingen University Library. And what is more, it was a copy in the Grenville map collection, and he was the foreign secretary to whom Charles Whitworth sent the map of Japan. It took me another half a year until I could receive the image due to the COVID-19 pandemic and chaotic situation. So this is a book-like leather box which Greenwich copy was stored. The outline of the Isles of Japan and the domestic boundaries within Japan were all drawn by pen with neither Japanese nor Russian handwriting of the names of provinces. The unique feature of this specific to the Greenwich copy is that the shade of the castles has been added, although the map of Kōdayū did not have such shades. Pre-modern Japanese drawing often lack of shades, whereas it seems that Whitworth, as a European, could not help adding shades of the castles. It looks very odd to us Japanese that stone walls of castles, which Kōdayū did not add drawing, was interpreted by Whitworth as if it has been leaned columns, just as he added shadows, tell us. As a result of the investigation on the images and later examination of the map, I was convinced that Greenwich copy was the precisely reproduced copy that was mentioned by the Whitworth. The biggest feature of the Kōdayū's map is that Honshu, which is main island of Japan, and Kyushu are connected, just Dr. Dorofeeva-Lichtmann discussed, and this coincides with the Greenwich copy. This was not the case with the previously known maps of Japan, even from the late 16th century maps brought back by Jesuit missionaries that had come to Japan. Questions should be asked why the Kōdayū's map of Japan does not have the common traits. Some have argued that Kōdayū did not know about the geographic features which were away from his home regions. According to the report by Whitworth to Grenville, Kōdayū was shown maps of Japan available in Europe and answered that although they were not very far from the truth, yet details were not very accurate and the distances of the headlands were false. According to the other archives, it was Peter Simon Pallas who gave Kōdayū's information to Whitworth, because Laxman kept Kōdayū away from Dutch and especially British ambassadors. On the other hand, after returning to Japan, Kōdayū was interviewed by intellectuals, Japanese intellectuals, to collect Western information. Kōdayū witnessed that maps of Japan in Europe were very accurate and provinces were also marked. Not only was his interview, but also his experience were recorded. However, he did not mention anything about his map making in Russia. During his stay in Russia, he was asked to be a Japanese language teacher, but he never accepted to work for Russia. He kept his strong mind even under the difficult situation and never gave up returning to Japan. For these reasons, I concluded that Kōdayū deliberately hid accurate information of the common straits and kept giving the Russians inaccurate information. As a consequence, this inaccurate map information was also brought to the UK. The Granville map collection consists of 1,300 maps, most of which were published in the late 18th century. As this graph shows, the years of publication suggest that the Granville map collection were not antiquities, but his contemporary maps with most updated geographical information for the British Empire and her colonial territorial expansions. The map of Japan copied from Kōdayū's map was in the first box of his collection, and it was the only map which focused on the islands of Japan. In the other map, which contained Japan, Japan was drawn in a part of the map which included larger areas such as East Asia, Whole Asia, and Asian Pacific. I would also like to add that the historical background of British interest in the Far East, which was also pointed out by Clement Bing. Towards the end of 1791, a project for the British Lord Macartney Embassy to China under the Qing dynasty started. Macartney was also interested in negotiation with Japan and opening of Japan as a secondary objective, and therefore he was given credential to the rulers of Japan. In April 1792, Macartney learned that a Japanese had been brought to St. Petersburg, so Macartney sent an instruction to Whitworth to secure the Japanese as an interpreter for his mission to Japan. Whitworth had already sent all the available information on Kōdayū before receiving the instruction by Macartney. But the letter by Whitworth had not reached Macartney, which had apparently been intercepted. According to Whitworth, he was cut off all communication with Kōdayū because it seems that there was dangerous views connected with Kōdayū and Lord Macartney towards Japan. At that time, Great Britain was regarded as the only rivaling power against Russia in the commercial and political activities towards Japan. Here is a table of archives and literature sources which refer to Daikokuya Kōdayū's map of Japan. European scholars, such as in the magazine Bees, Matthew Guthrie to Anderson, and in Göttingen, Asch to Heine. This is the first part, and the second part. For example, Blumenbach in Göttingen University to Joseph Banks in UK. And von Zach, all the intellectuals have noted the map and recorded about Kōdayū's map of Japan and wanted to publish the map. However, it was never realized in the end. Here, I would like to move on to the circulation of a modern map by Japanese to Europe. Kaisei Nihon Yochirote Zenzu, the famous map by Nagakobu Sekisui. This map was brought to Europe by Isaac Tiching, a captain of Dutch East India Company in Dejima. He shipped the map to his brother in Amsterdam after January 1792, and Tiching also returned to London at the end of December 1796. In April 1800, the map was introduced in a magazine as a part of the Tiching's Japanese collection, which suggests that the map made by a Japanese author, Nagakubo Sekisui, had attracted great public attention. This slide shows the chronological order of the published map of Japan in Europe, which were based on the surveys during the voyages. In 1784, based on the survey during the third voyage of Captain Cook, the northwest part of the mainland of Japan was published. In 1797, a British commander, in 1797, a British commander, map of Japan was published by a French voyage led by La Perouse. In 1804, British commander Captain Broughton published a map of Japan based on his voyages around Japan in 1796 and 1797. Thus, at the end of the 18th century, maps of Japan were replaced by modern surveyed map by voyagers. The map of Japan by Kōdayū, although it had pre-modern features, appeared during the transitional period, and during 3 or 4 years at least. It was the latest map just before the La Perouse voyage was published. Therefore, although it had still pre-modern features, the map of Japan by Kōdayū was the only available map of Japan for Europeans as the latest information. That the author of the map, Captain Kōdayū, rendered its geographical and scientific values. In conclusion, the discovery of Daikokuya Kōdayū's map in the UK has exhibited the following 3 points in the history of cartographic knowledge in Europe and British diplomacy in the late 18th century. First, Kōdayū's map was seen as the latest map of Japan, although it has 3 to 4 years before the publication of the modern maps by the European voyagers, based on the surveys. Kōdayū was looked on as important informant on the latest nautical knowledge of Japan, and his map attracted many contemporary European scholars. Second, the existence of the Kōdayū's map shows British keen interest on the Far East, which was contemporary with the MacArthur's embassy. Finally, Kōdayū was mainly discussed within the framework of Japan-Russia relations in the Edo period, but it also reflects British and Russian interest in the Far East when it was still difficult to gain access to Japan, and the competition of the two empires in the late 18th century. Finally, I'd like to thank all the people who supported my research. Especially, I'd like to thank Dr. Dorofeeva-Lichtmann, who kindly let me join this panel. So thank you very much for your attention.
So now, now we are going to listen to Professor Patrick Beillevaire, who is emeritus researcher at French CNRS, and who is going to talk about the Chinese sea route to Ryūkyū, cartographical and geopolitical fortune of its landmarks.
Okay, let's try. First, I want to express my deepest thanks to Alexandra for the organization of this conference, and for all the, as we say in French, petites mains who also helped. The Okay. The starting point of this presentation is a sketchy nautical chart included in the report of the Chinese embassy sent to the kingdom of Ryūkyū, traditionally known as Chuzan, which is today's Okinawa, in 1719 for the investiture of King Shokei. The report itself, Chuzan Denshinroku, I say it in Japanese, was printed in Beijing in 1721, and it is authored by Vice Ambassador in Japanese it's Dohoko, and in Chinese it's Su Baogang. It is the earliest and most complete chart showing the route followed by the ships carrying Chinese envoys and merchants between Fuzhou, the mandatory port of departure from China, and Naha, the port of entry to the royal capital Shuli. Such embassies took place for about 5 centuries, until 1866, as well as the other way, Ryūkyūan tribute and trade missions to China. I reverse, well, that's better fit our reading habit with the West on the left and the East on the right. Let us first examine the sailing instructions that you can see written on this chart along the travel lines. The north and south travel lines are not to be seen as two different routes, but as variations of the same route, always subjected to unforeseen meteorological factors. There are 15 phrases of instruction in all. Their wording and content are typical of the nautical chart of the Qing period. The general formula, as Joseph Needham put it, is sail on X degrees for Y watches. Basically, they comprise three types of data. First, the compass bearing or direction to head for. The compass Hariban or Shinanshin, has 24 directions named after composite elements of the Chinese ordinal system. I put you have 12 earthly signs and 10 celestial signs, and also 4 trigrams, 2 trigrams. No, 8 and 2. Sorry, it's more complicated than it should be. The second type of data, of information, is the number of watches, or gang. I'm sorry, my pronunciation, Chinese pronunciation is not good. It's Ko in Japanese. To keep sailing, so the number of watches to keep sailing in that direction. Gang measures both distance and time. Here it is worth 60 li, Chinese li, as specified in the Chinese report. 1 li is about half a kilometer. And likely 2.4 hours. The passing of time is determined by means of a sand glass, hariro or sunatoke, like the one that illustrates the report. The name of the place, that is the third type of data, of information, is the name of the place. One is living, nearing, or reaching. You can see, well, sorry. No, it's okay. Oh yeah, I forgot, it's 2-time slide. Yeah. So I put on the left, you can see the basic vocabulary, which is always used in the instructions. And also an attempted tentative translation of one instruction concerning the Senkaku or Diaoyu Island. A simplified copy of this map chart is found in the report of the next Chinese embassy in 1757, with legends shortened and positioned vertically, as you can see. Let us now consider how this chart, with its nautical landmarks, has become central to the contemporary Sino-Japanese dispute over the possession of the Ryūkyū or Senkaku Islands. This may be an old hat for some of you, I'm sorry, but we are going to see that precisely. So it has become central to the contemporary dispute over the Ryūkyū and Senkaku Island, but not directly, through its inclusion in the mapping of the China Sea by European and Japanese cartographers, in combination with the map of the Ryūkyū Islands from the same Chinese report. The first borrowing originates from the Jesuit Antoine Gobil, a Beijing resident, and the second from the famous samurai scholar from Sendai, Hayashi Shihei. Both types of maps were widely circulated. About the French maps, this is Gobil's map. About the French maps, suffice it to say that they clearly differentiate the Ryūkyū Island from the Ryūkyū Island. The royal geographer Danville and Buache hurried to put fully to profit Gobil's map. Gobil's map and information as soon as his manuscript arrived in Paris. Needless here to dwell on the French transcription of Chinese and Lithuanian names, but anyway, I made a table, so it's, well. You can see on the right Klaproth, as I'm going to talk about Klaproth, but his transcription is from the Japanese pronunciation of place names. So all the names of the islands are from the Chinese chart are carefully incorporated in the French maps. Let us focus on Hayashi Shiei's map of the 36 Ryūkyū Islands, printed in 1786 in Edo to accompany his book Sangoku Tsuran Tsusetsu, an illustrated description of the three countries, that is Korea, Ezo, which is today Hokkaido, and the Ryūkyū. The map covers the whole China Sea from Shandong province to Guangdong, and includes the travel lines and islands of the original Chinese chart, with only distances instead of sailing instruction. There is no sailing instruction, but you can, I don't know if you can read, but there are distances on the north and along the north and south travel lines. 240 and 300 Japanese ri are given as equivalent to the 2,400 and 3,000 Chinese li. That is 1/10 of the figures for Chinese li. The use of colors is the most noticeable feature of this map, no doubt intended to differentiate countries. Red for China, brown for Ryūkyū, yellow for Taiwan, and green for Japan. The Ryūkyū Island, which extends eastward to Chiwe Island, now known by the Japanese as Taisho Jima, are thus recognized as Chinese territory. It's the easternmost, not the easternmost, but this island, Chiwe Island. Today, in the news, when they refer to Senkaku, they don't. It's not clear, but actually, the Senkaku Retto extend to that island on the east, Chiwe Island or Taisho Jima. So beyond that island, Chiwe Island, or Taishojima, there is Kumejima, which is considered at the time by both the Chinese and the Ryūkyūans to be the westernmost Ryūkyū island on this sea route. Hayashi's map was rendered in French with similar coloring by Heinrich Julius Klaproth, the translator of Sangoku Tsuran Susetsu, published in Paris in 18... Okay. I'm sorry. Yes, Klaproth is a translator of Sangoku Tsuran Susetsu, published in Paris in 1832 under the title Aperçu des Trois Royaumes. It's possible that the copy of Sangoku Tsuran Susetsu was brought to Europe by, it's the one brought by Titsing. Some people think that Klaproth found it in Irkutsk, but I'm not convinced. I think it's more likely Titsing's copy. This is an original this is an original of Hayashi's map, or the original, which is kept at the cartography department of the French National Library. It bears handwritten words and numbers. I don't know if you can see that in red, likely from Klaproth's own hand. I would tend to think, as they carry the Japanese spelling used by Klaproth himself. This is Klaproth's map, very similar to Hayashi Shiei's map. So you can see that on these maps, Hayashi Shiei's and Klaproth's map, the islands on the sea route are attributed to China, Taiwan and Ryūkyū. This is table. Do not pay attention to the awful colors, but it's just to, well, you see the islands are, if you start from Fudzu and going back to Fudzu, the islands are attributed to China, Taiwan, China, and then the Ryūkyū, and back to China and Taiwan, possibly. Nowadays, Hayashi Shiei's map is regarded as a main piece of evidence to support China's claim to the Diaoyu Islands. Hayashi Shiei's keen interest in geography was driven by his commitment to strengthening Japan's coastal defense and military capability in the face of European navies. To him, China was a potential enemy too, which makes his territorial demarcations all the more significant. His bold criticisms and recommendations about defense, expressed in his other book, Kaikoku Heidan, well, I recommend to you the introduction of that Annick Horiguchi wrote to the translation of that book. It's very useful introduction. So his recommendation and criticism expressed in his Kaikoku Heidan soon caused him to be placed under house arrest and his books and maps to be destroyed. Copies kept circulating though, notably those of Nakagome Masamichi. So it's a similar copy to Hayashi Shiei's map. And sometimes errors passed unnoticed. This is a map kept at the map division of the Library of Congress, and I noticed by chance that the spelling about the order of the kanji is wrong. You know, it's Mari-shan instead of Lima-shan, and it's not mentioned, so I suppose nobody saw it. Well, I don't know. The Diaoyu Island have been called Senkaku by the Japanese since the late 19th century, after the name Pinnacle given in 1789 by the British Lieutenant James Colnett to one of these picked islands. Following the Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895, I'm finished. Tokyo annexed them to the Okinawa prefecture, despite their geological proximity. Well, we know today that, as we know it today, to Taiwan. The prefecture of Okinawa had been recently created in 1879 to complete the annexation of the kingdom of Ryūkyū. Prior to that, one may say that the Japanese, either Edo or Tokyo, did not care about these islands or islets, and that they implicitly considered them as lying more or less within the Chinese sphere and certainly outside of Japan's or Ryūkyū maritime territory. It does not come totally as a surprise that the communist historian Inoue Kiyoshi still sided steadfastly with the Chinese claim, notably on the basis of Hayashi Shie's map and also of Arai Hakuseki's book, Ryūkyū Koku Jiryaku. But you see. The obvious fact is that today's Japan is not much inclined to ponder on cartographic details or on the pre-Meiji Chinese sphere of influence, as shown on the internet site of its Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So Japan's you can read it. I don't see it myself. So Japan's position seems final. This is also the end of my presentation. Thank you.
So now I am glad to give the floor to Elke Papelitzky from Oslo University, who is going to present a paper titled Circles and Triangles, mapping the shape of maritime Southeast Asia in early modern Japan and the connection with Sinographic Asia. Please.
Thank you. So I want to introduce you today, to this map that you're seeing here, which is a map made in Japan. It's a manuscript map, and there are several peculiar contents on this, what makes this a relatively unique map, but which also mean that I actually cannot tell you an awful lot of it. So there are there are at least 3 manuscript copies of this map surviving. One is in Kyoto University. The other was previously in the collection of K.L. Tam. I don't know where it is now because he sold most of his collection. I'm not sure if he sold this map as well. And then by chance, this summer when I was in Japan, I found a 3rd manuscript with a private collector called Kaida Toshikazu. And this map, it doesn't have a title. So it's very difficult to find copies in library catalogs because without a title, there's also no information on an author. There's no way for me to find this in any library catalogs. So I really have to rely on people telling me there's another copy of this map or similar maps, or just going to private collectors and them showing me their collection and then, oh, there's a 3rd one of these. So this makes studying this map relatively difficult. No title, no author, no date. So what I'm going to do today is just to look at the contents of this map, to try to figure out the dating and what's the relevance of this map and the connection of this map to other mapping practices in what I call Sinographic Asia. Mostly I will be talking about China today, but Sinographic Asia would also include Korea and Vietnam. But today I will focus on the connection between China and Japan. So this is a map. On this map you can see the biggest part of this map is the geography of the Ming Empire, so the geography of China. So at the very center you have all the provinces of China, marked in beautiful colors. To the very edge on the right, you see in red like the westernmost tip of Kyushu. So Kyushu still pokes into the map. And then what is very unusual, as we will see throughout this talk, is the depiction of Southeast Asia. So south of the Ming Empire, there's some more land masses. You can make out the shape of Vietnam. You can make out the shape of the Malay Peninsula. And then at the very bottom, we also have Luzon and like a little bit of Java. So this is like the geographic space of this map. We have the Ming, we have Southeast Asia, and we have a little bit of Japan. And finding a source for the part on the Ming Empire was relatively straightforward. So looking at how the Ming Empire is depicted, very quickly I figured out which map this Japanese map maker based the depiction of the Ming Empire on. And this is this map. It's from 1555. We have one copy that is currently held in Seville. It was printed in 1555 in Fuzhou, and it must have circulated to Japan for our unknown anonymous map maker to put it onto his manuscript map. So when we look in detail, I will show you a few details. We can really see that that must have been the source. So for example here, this is the Shandong Peninsula, on the left the Japanese map, on the right the Chinese map. And there's this weird river that crosses the Shandong Peninsula. Usually the Shandong Peninsula is attached to the mainland, so here we have the opposite effect than from the maps Vera and Yuko showed us, where suddenly a strait is missing. Here we have an additional strait. That is quite peculiar to this 1555 Chinese maps. So this really points to this being the source for the Japanese map maker. And then also if we look into the space of the northwest to the northwestern region of the Ming Empire, there's a lot of text on this Chinese map, a lot of descriptions on the regions north of the Great Wall. There's like very short texts on the people living there, and these have been copied pretty precisely word for word. I haven't found any differences or any major differences on the Japanese map. So the space that we have of most of the Ming Empire and what is north of the Great Wall really is more or less identical on the Chinese and the Japanese map. Obviously, I have not really carefully checked character by character, so there might be tiny differences, but generally we can be very certain that this Ming map served as the main source for the Japanese map maker for their way of drawing the Ming Empire. But then, if we look into the maritime space, we start to see some differences. First of all, if we look at Fujian province, we can already see some very major differences that start to help us to date the Japanese manuscript, or more or less are actually the only indication of a date for this Japanese manuscript. So on the Ming map, the one on the right, Fujian province has like the main ports of trade that are mentioned on the Chinese map are Quanzhou and Zhangzhou, which in the 16th century were the major trading ports between China, between the Ming and other places in Southeast Asia. These were the main ports for trade. On the Japanese maps, however,
we have two additions. So Quanzhou and Zhangzhou are on the map, but there's also Xiamen, or that is known as Amoy in English, is added. So that there's two islands south of Quanzhou and Zhangzhou. One is Xiamen and the other is Jinmen. And these and Xiamen becomes a more important trading port during the Qing. So in the course of the 17th century, Xiamen takes over the role as the major trading port in Fujian province, as the major maritime trading port. So here we can already see that the Japanese map maker added information on trade that is later than what we can see on the 1555 Ming map. But then even more telling is the addition of Taiwan. So this bigger island that you can see off the coast of Fujian province is Taiwan. And on the Chinese 1555 map, Taiwan isn't mentioned. It's not part of the spatial imaginary of the Ming Empire at the time, so there was no need to draw in Taiwan. But the Japanese map maker, they did add Taiwan. And also important, on Taiwan there's a place name called Dongnin, which is a place name that only was created in 1662. So we know that the Japanese map cannot have been created before 1662 because this place name didn't exist before. And that shows us that the temporal makeup of this Japanese map already has at least two layers. So we have the 1555 layer that was copied from this Ming map, and then we have additional contents from sometime in the second half of the 17th century or even later. It could be anything. It could be like an 18th century map. It could be an early 19th century map. There's no other indications on this manuscript map that help me date it further. But all I can say is that it's definitely second half of the 17th century or later. So this is what we can see by looking at the space of the Ming Empire. But now I'm also very interested in how Southeast Asia is represented on these maps. And if we look at the Ming map, this is a very typical way of drawing Southeast Asia in Chinese maps of this time period of the 16th, 17th century. You have the coast of China, and then Southeast Asia is simply represented by little round circles with blobs that just mention the name of the place. So here you can see Java, you can see Sriwijaya, you can see Borneo, and these are just small little circles somewhere off the coast of the Ming. It doesn't matter where exactly they are. The important thing is to put them on the map to show, oh yeah, there are these other places and the Ming is connected to them, but the shape of these places wasn't important to the Chinese map maker who made this 1555 map. But if we look at the Japanese map, as I've already pointed out, the shape of Southeast Asia is important to this Japanese map maker. You can see the coast of Vietnam. Even if you could not read the characters, you could see, oh yeah, that the part in yellow over here, that's the coast of Vietnam. You can make out the Gulf of Thailand just by looking at the map and the shape of what is drawn on the map. So this is a major difference as well, just in the way the space is conceived and the way the space is depicted. Suddenly the shape matters. It's not just the fact that these places are there that matter, but it's the shape that matters. And another interesting thing on this map is on the lower right corner, the little island marked in red, that is labeled as Luzon. So it's in the Philippines. And if you remember, if you think about Google Maps and where Luzon actually is located, you might think, oh, this is very to the south. Shouldn't Luzon be further north than it's depicted here? And I think I have the answer on what happened here and why Lüsong is down at the bottom of the map. Because we do have quite a few European maps and also some Japanese maps that mark like the northern tip of Lüsong on maps of China. So here's just two examples, Martini's map of China and then Japanese from around 1725, where we have the northern tip of Lüsong at the very end, like at the bottom of a map of the Ming Empire. And what I think happened here is that whoever is our anonymous Japanese map maker, they did see a map like this, saw the northern tip of Lüsong, and then put it on their map at the very bottom. So seeing maps with the northern tip of Lüsong is quite common. So basically, we seem to have now already at least we have another layer. So we have the Ming map for the Ming parts. We have the layer for Fujian province. We have the coastlines of Vietnam and the Gulf of Thailand. And then we have another source for the northern tip of Lüsong. So whoever made this Japanese map, they really mangled up a lot of different sources. What's also quite interesting, if we look a little bit more in detail into this map, is something Patrick already alluded to in his talk, and that is distances. So across Southeast Asia, there are little notes on how far away these places in Southeast Asia and also Taiwan, how far away they are from Japan. So it's a number, it's just like a number and then the unit ri, miles. And this is also something that's not this mystery Japanese map maker, they didn't make this up. This is something that's quite a staple on Japanese maps or geographic knowledge generally as well. So here, for example, is Ishikawa Ryūsen's map of Japan, where in this on the top there's like a little note how far away these places are from Japan, and this kind of knowledge also makes it into books. Here, like Nishikawa Joken's World Geography, where it also just mentions how far away places are from Japan. And I did a little bit of comparison with these numbers, and they don't match. So I couldn't find any Japanese source that uses the exact same number as our mystery Japanese map. They're not completely off. They are more or less the same. More or less the same distance, but they're not exactly the same distance. So I haven't been able to find an exact match. So there we can really see all the different elements that came together to make this Japanese map. It's not just one source that was used, but multiple sources to make this really unique map. And another question I asked myself was, can we find similar map to this manuscript? And yes and no. For some parts of what I've been talking about, I did find similar maps. And the most matching one is one that's currently at the McLean Collection, a private collection in Illinois, near Chicago. This is much smaller than the other one, but it more or less shows you the same space. It shows you the geography of the Ming Empire. There's like a little bit of Kyushu, and then there's the shape of Southeast Asia. But there are quite a few differences between these maps as well. So first of all, if you look into how Southeast Asia is depicted, Lüsong in this case is in the middle of the ocean. It's further north. So it's not one of these maps where Lüsong is just the northern tip at the very edge of the paper. The distances are missing, And also, if we compare the geography of the Ming Empire, it's also not the same map that was used. So it's a very different map in many aspects if we look at the detail, but the idea is very much the same. So the idea of showing a map of the Ming Empire or of a China, with the space of Southeast Asia showing the coastline and showing the areas by drawing the shape of Southeast Asia. So with this idea in mind, these two maps are very similar. And then I started thinking, can we find more maps like this? And at this point, it's become quite difficult to find very similar maps. So we do have in Japan quite a few portolan charts that were made in the 17th and 18th century, and even in the 19th century, that show you in many ways similar ideas. They show you the coastlines of Southeast Asia by drawing the shape and not just little blobs. But these portolan charts, they do not care about what's happening within the Ming Empire. They do not care about the provinces of China. They do not care about anything beyond the Great Wall. So it's just the coastlines. This is where they differ mostly. And also these maps, they do not mark the distance in a D. They show the map reader the distances by giving a scale. So they're also conceptually quite different than the Japanese manuscript map. And if we look into the Chinese context, the most matching map might be the Selden map that was produced in the early 17th century, either in China or in Southeast Asia. There's a lot of discussion on where exactly the Selden map was made, but anyway, it is written in Chinese, and it shows a lot of aspects similar to the Japanese manuscript I'm introducing today. It shows you the geography of the Ming Empire. It shows you the coastlines of Southeast Asia. It has like the part of Kyushu on it. So in terms of space, it is really similar. And it also gives you distances. In a different system, it doesn't say these places are far away from Japan in a certain way, but the system it uses to show you distances is very similar to what Patrick introduced for the map of Ryūkyū with the line and then the compass bearings. Oh yeah, actually no, the Selden map does not have distances, it just has the compass bearings. So this is missing from the Selden map. And then we have other Chinese maps that in terms of the spatial conception resemble more the Japanese portolan charts in that they show the coastline of Southeast Asia but do not care about what is happening within China. So in conclusion, we have these manuscripts and these Japanese manuscripts, and we do not know who made them. We do not know what they were made for. There's still a lot of work to do, which I don't know if I will ever be able to answer if I cannot find any information about these maps because they do not have a title. But what is interesting is that all these maps, even the similar maps I've shown you today, the Japanese maps that are similar, the Chinese maps that are similar, they are all in manuscript. I haven't found a single printed map from the 17th or 18th or even early 19th century that has similar characteristics than these maps I've just shown you. So this idea of showing a map of the Ming Empire or of China plus the space of Southeast Asia, plus the maritime space of Southeast Asia, that seems to be something that was only important enough to be made into a manuscript, and nobody thought it would be a good idea to print it. But it was made not only in Japan, but we can find similar maps in China as well. And they're all from the 17th and 18th century that I found, and they all focus on distances in one way or another to show you the distances between places, which is important for the maritime space. So a few answers, a lot of questions still left, but this is what we can figure out by just looking in detail at this map. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thanks to the speakers who have just respected strictly the time. We have, I suppose, 10 minutes multiplied by 4, which is 40 minutes for discussion. Is it all right? So now, have you some questions?
Thank you very much for all your presentations. As a big fan of the history of cartography, I would have a lot of questions, but I'm going to try to just ask 2 questions. The first one would be to Vera and Takigawa sensei concerning the Daikokuya Kōdayū map. How do you think that it could have been at all inspired by Ishikawa Ryūsen's map, the ones that Elke mentioned, even with the little Moji Strait different, or even the 1662 Fusokoku no Zu? So that would be my first question. Could there be an inspiration there? And my second question would be to Patrick Beillevaire. Were any of the Ryūkyū maps or the maps of that region, to the best of your knowledge, been exhibited at the National Museum of Territory and Sovereignty in Japan, which opened in 2018? Because I know that they frequently have exhibitions of old maps to educate the public on the different territories that Japanese has sovereignty over, even though everybody doesn't agree. So in the case of okay, well then my only question will be for Vera and Takigawa sensei. Thank you very much.
Ishikawa Ryūsen, but maybe Yuko would say.
I also don't think that it was inspired by the Ishikawa Ryūsen's map, and Kōdayū clearly told somebody like Matthew Guthrie that he has a encyclopedia. He had a copy of Japanese book because. Even during the shipwrecked time, she kept his some copies of the book, and one of them was Setsuyoshu, so which is kind of encyclopedia for the general people. And because there are so many versions of Setsuyoshu, so it's hard to identify which copy of the version of the maps he used. But I think, as Vera has already shown, the one of the map which has a very, very narrow straits of common could be the original, I think. Do you have any things to add?
No, I'm communicating with also with my colleague. Actually, she found Ekaterina. She found one of the maps which she supposes this was the copy of the encyclopedia which Kōdayū could have had with him, and it has, I think, either it's a mistake, so the Kanmon Strait is not there. That's all. I didn't have time to develop on this, but she wants to develop a little bit. I think we put a reference to the article. So it's just like, it's a bad print. I think it was 1751, if I remember correctly. It's not very good print, so there is no, there is missing, or let's say, the strait is not very clear.
Another question, please.
You didn't mention the size of the maps in order to give us any information about how it has been done. And secondly, I wanted to be, I'm here with the man who did the map, and I wanted to know if you know about how it has been done. Making the north at the top, the south at the bottom, or rewriting or sketching the map, and putting information around. And that is a few questions. And in general, what was missing in your talk is the way it is represented. As a shape on the paper, For example, there were some comparison between the way castles has been written or designed or sketched on that is really interesting, because it is a map is a representation of a word, and it is a representation of the word through the eyes of the one who is making the map.
Yeah, that's a very good question about the size. So the first map I showed, I think it was 1.50 meters by a meter. I had the one in the McLean collection, that's half the size, so that's very small. And about how it was drawn, I do not know. I have no information on that. Probably just somebody. I don't know, just the usual way of making a map. I haven't thought about that. And the maps I've shown, they're all consistently, so the Japanese maps, the manuscripts I've shown, they're consistently oriented with north at the top. So all the writing is in one direction, in contrast to the map Patrick showed. Some of the other maps I compared the main manuscript map with, they're oriented all over the place, and that's pretty normal for Japanese maps, that there's no set orientation, and then you put them on the floor and you sit around and you walk around to look at the map. That's like the general what we know about looking at Japanese maps, but I cannot be any more specific about the manuscript maps that I discussed today.
Yes. About the same subjects, I wonder if it was in fact possible during the second part of the 17th century to produce printed map of Ming China. I don't know, but in fact, after the beginning of the seclusion policy in Japan, there was a general ban over the importation of China's books in Japan, and of course together some information about Chinese empire. You have to brook these books from China. So of course it was perhaps difficult at these times to print recent information from China in Japan before the 18th century. So I don't know if there were in fact before 18th century printed map of China, Ming or Qing, or perhaps older empire or dynasty of China in Japan at this time. I don't know very well. Could you answer?
Yeah. I think knowledge of China was never really sensitive. It's the knowledge on the Christians that was banned of entering. And if we look at the history of book between China, between the Ming and the Qing and Japan, there's so many books, Chinese books in Japan, that if as a sinologist, going to Japan is the best thing ever, because all the geographies, all the maps are conserved in Japan, and they arrived in Japan in the 17th century and in the 18th century. So I don't think it was a sensitive topic. And we do have Japanese printed maps of China. One of the books I've shown, the Nishikawa Zokans, it does have a map of China, a printed map of Japan, of China in there. So I don't think it was a sensitive topic at all.
Yes, but Nishikawa Zokan is from the beginning of 18th century. So, in fact, in Nagasaki, there were many maps on many books about Chinese geography on circles of intellectuals who studied these topics, but I wonder if they could publish
there's not a lot of printed 17th century Japanese maps in general. So there's a few, like the world map Bankoku Sozu. I wrote an article about that, 17th century, but generally the Japanese print market for maps only start in the late 17th, early 18th century, as far as I know. I don't know if anybody else knows of a lot of earlier maps. So the print market only really takes off for maps in the 18th century, I would say. I don't know if anybody of you disagrees with that. If any of you found a lot of 17th century printed maps, please let me know.
Hi, what a wonderful panel, and what wonderful materials, and so remarkable to see so many different perspectives. I'm a modernist, and so out of my depth, pun intended, that's a terrible joke. So what I was thinking about as I was looking at these remarkable documents and the analysis, the rich analysis, is its diversity. You know, under modernity, in beginning just ahead of Meiji, but moving into Meiji, cartography normalizes in a sense. It becomes singular. We begin to see dominant hegemonic representations of Pacific spaces and oceanic spaces. So a single way of looking at space becomes normal. And what I, as a non-specialist, saw in this marvelous panel is diversity. And difference across the different maps. Even as we look at the layers, we see incremental and small connections. And I'm wondering if you could, what am I missing? Is there an underlying logic that unites these? I would love to hear how the different maps may share a cartographic sense? What are the commonalities? Or is it in fact a story of diversity and difference, which is in and of itself interesting because it suggests a more diverse landscape and a lack of connections other than these singular threads that you've done such remarkable detective work to pull out. So I'm interested in diversity and difference, and is there a early modern logic to cartography that I might teach my students?
Okay, so I would say I would say that even modern maps are much more diverse as you make them out to be. I think there's a lot of different ways even today to draw maps, and also in modernity. So I think what you're thinking of is like this standardized way that does exist, but there's also different ways of. For example, we have maps from today that shows like population, where like it's distorted, like with the China appearing much bigger and Russia appearing much smaller. So even today there's diversity in the way maps are depicted. And I would say each map, especially in the early modern period and also today, they're all made to a specific purpose, and that's why they look so different, because they all have very different purposes, and none of us really talk that much about materiality and how it is shown, also relating to the question there, and even also that has an impact in how the maps look like and how they're presented, and there's a lot of diversity in that today as well. So I would say maps have always been diverse. Yeah.
Is a specialist in cartography, makes a strong argument that there is a normalizing move that happens in Meiji. And so, of course, there are different maps. There are Mercator projection and so on. But nonetheless, we do see the state and particular interest taking a dominant role in the formation of cartography. I think there's little debate that happens in the modern. And I'm wondering, was there a similar sort of interest? I am interested in use. I'm struck by the size difference that came up earlier. A meter by a meter and a half is quite hard to have on the deck of a ship unless they have a particular space or they're folding the map. And so I suppose I'm interested in that element as well. But I am, perhaps Karin has it wrong in that she claims quite strongly that a certain kind of hegemonic vision emerges in Meiji, and so I'm just curious whether that is distinct.
No, well, sorry. As you noticed, at least, well, maybe the four presentations have to do with the perception of Japan outside. One, Kōdayū is a map. Well, it's a map made by drawn by Japanese for Westerners, Russians, and in the case of Hayashi, it's first. It's a map intended for Japanese, for the shogun government, and through Klaproth it became. But Klaproth introduced something from Japan, and it just copied the map. And in your case also, well, it's but you don't know exactly what where it comes from, and but it has to do the perception of the outside world for Japanese, but you don't know exactly when. At what time it was useful to have that perception. I don't know, but it has to do with the relationship between the inside, outside. But even Hayashi's, he worries. It's a map intended for the government, for Edo, but it has to do with the outside because it's a representation of the outside. Well, so it's just very it's a banality to say that.
Thank you very much for this very interesting panel. And I have a question to Elke Papelitzky. This map is, so you said that it was a Japanese map, but the part of Japan which is depicted is very small and not very precise. So and was wondering if it was written by a Japanese, because it can be, it is strange that Japan is depicted this way by a Japanese. And I thought about it because you said that, or Patrick said that Kōdayū was depicting his country very precisely because he knew his country. So it seems natural to think that a Japanese will represent his country in a more detailed way. So maybe it is possible that the map was written by a Chinese. Is it a possibility for you that it is a Chinese map?
The language, it's in katakana. There's a lot of katakana on there. It's in Japanese. So the map, the place names in China are in Chinese, but the rest is in katakana. It's in Japanese, and it's just a question of where you set the boundaries, right? It's just the southern tip of Kyushu, and if you want to make a map that shows the connection between Kyushu, Southeast Asia, and China, you don't need all of Japan. You need Kyushu, you need Nagasaki, because this is where everything is connected. So I wouldn't say that the map of Japan is imprecise, but it's definitely made by a Japanese. You can also tell by the paper, and because it's in Japanese and not in Chinese.
Yes, it is written in Japanese.
Yes.
Just written in Japanese, but we can imagine that the drawing was done by someone else, and the legend has been well, we can imagine a lot of things.
I'm pretty sure it's by a Japanese. It's a okay. Japanese map by a Japanese person.
Okay. And so maybe if
the colors are Japanese and the paper, and it's in Japanese libraries, and it's in katakana, and it really fits in the way there's like the colors and just the style of writing. It's very Japanese.
Yes.
I don't see any possibility of this.
Because my question was like that because I know that sometimes Japanese were writing on, for example, Dutch maps, or it is possible that people collaborate around a map. It's not completely, imagination. There are cases like that. So that's.
I just have a question to Yuko Takigawa. What do you think, which Western maps Kōdayū could see in Russia? Because I think, what I thought the only possibility was Tavernier, was the French map, which was then like 80 years after translated into Russian very, very faithfully. It was like the Klaproth case when you just copy absolutely even everything, even all the legends and all the colors, whatsoever. So I think it was just Tavernier. I do not see whether he could have seen anything else, but maybe I'm wrong.
Thank you for your question, Vera. I think he definitely sees a map of Japan from camphor. Map of Japan, camphor. Mm-hmm. Because one of the reasons is that I assume camphor's map of Japan and also his copy of the book, History of Japan, was brought to with Adam Laxman when he came to Ezo. So I'm sure he saw the map. And also Nova Acta, which was published in 1794, but it was a publication for 1790, remarked that Laxman presented the map to the court of the Russian court, and which which says it is quite different from the latest map of Japan by Kōdayū, but which looks quite different from map of Kempfer. And I also think that you are right, that the Tavernier map must have been seen by Kōdayū, because when Laxman's expedition and also when Kōdayū was sent back to Japan, Laxman gave many copies of the Western maps, and which also includes the Tavernier map of Japan. So I think it was a question. To me, it sounds like I felt that it was a question from the Russian or Western people that is this the map of Japan, or do you think is this not the latest map of Japan? Because Tavernier map is it's older. It has clear. It clearly shows the common straits.
So if
one last question.
I had one question for Takigawa sensei. I've heard that the Kaisei Nihon Yochirote Zenzu was brought by the Netherlands to Europe, and I was wondering, because there was a competition between the European countries to open relationships with Japan and to cartography Japanese realm and its islands, but during the speeches, I've thought that Netherlands was kind of absent to this race, because on the top of it there was like England and Russia, then in the second time maybe France, and then the rest of the European countries. Why was Netherlands so late in this race, even if they had a great access to Japan with Dejima? So that was my question.
So thank you for your question. And as long as according to the papers by Dr. Matsui and Frank Requiem, Kaisei, the map of Japan by Nagakubo Sekisui was brought by teaching, and it is now in the. I think there are 3 copies in Europe, and one of them are stored in the Leiden University Library, and Kraploff you mentioned is also used, and without quoting the teaching wrote many names of the Japanese places, but without quoting the contribution by teaching, Kraploff published the map of Japan, and also that was also reported by von Siebold in Nihon. And your question, why Netherlands didn't publish the latest map of Japan? Of course, in the late 18th century or early 19th century, I think they, for example, teaching might have the idea to publish the latest map of Japan, but intentionally, I've read somewhere that Netherlands never wanted to update the cartographic information, because Netherlands had the only Western country which had access to Japan, so they always used browsers quite late or Qkens map of East Asia or Pacific. So they are not inaccurate, but not very much updated. It is because I think Netherlands wanted to keep the access of Japan, monopolize the access of Japan, and that's also why even for during the late 18th century, after the voyage of the Captain Cook or La Pérouse, they tried to do the survey of the coast of Japan, but still the map published by them are still not complete. And La Pérouse map published in the late 18th century still quite different from the modern map of Japan. So, and also it has a very difficult navigation from Southeast Asia to Japan. So I assume one of the reasons was the Netherlands wanted to keep the secret access to Japan and monopolize the access.
It was forbidden. I mean, it was forbidden to copy maps. I mean, Japanese authorities did not allow foreigners to copy maps, so that's why von Siebold has some problems and was more or less expelled from Nagasaki. You know, he was privileged not to live in Dejima. He was living outside Dejima on the land, but I don't remember the name of his Japanese assistant, but he's the one who brought. That's why he could. His cards, his maps are much more accurate, but well, they were stolen.
Yes, thank you. It's just true that it was before the public map making of the modern map making based on the survey, for example, by Ino Tadataka, and as he correctly suggested, it was forbidden to copy the map of Japan by Japanese authority. But my age, that like Kōdayū's time, it was the transitional time, and before the map making of the modern version. So, for example, Kōdayū copied still like a Gyoki type style of the map of Japan. So, yeah, a little bit later, it was more accurate and also very accurate. And as you know, as Siebold expelled, map copy was seen as a serious sin by Japanese authority.
And there were not many Western visitors along the coast of Japan. So the first one, like Broughton, or then the British Hall, and then the French drew the first accurate maps of the coastline, and but it was mostly in the 19th century.
Thank you.
So I think we can finish now, and I would like to thank you very much for this thing. And